Hey, it's Justin Jackson here from Transistor. And this week, Apple announced a bunch of new things for podcasters, including Apple Podcast subscriptions. And there is a lot of confusion about what Apple Podcast subscriptions is, what it means for podcasters, and what it means for podcast hosting companies like Transistor. Here's a tweet I got. If Apple hosts the podcast, is there still an RSS feed that you can have on Apple if you host your podcast with them? Can you host your podcast with them? There's also this. What do these new podcasting features from Apple mean for services like Transistor, Libsyn, and Buzzsprout? And then there's emails like this. I'm hosting a private podcast with us, and they want to know, what does this mean if I was hosting a paid private podcast on an existing service like Patreon or Transistor? And this is just a group of the emails and customer support requests. We've had so many questions. And so I want to take you through what Apple Podcast subscriptions is and what it isn't. One of the reasons this is all confusing is we've just had a paradigm shift. If you listen to podcasts in the past, you probably heard the podcast host say, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Well, recently Apple changed that to follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts. So if you want to listen, if you want to be a subscriber of a free podcast, now the nomenclature is to follow that podcast as opposed to subscribe. And this is something that Spotify's been doing for a while now. If you want to get notifications when a new episode is published, you click follow in Spotify. And now the same is true for Apple Podcasts. We have this idea of following a free podcast. But in the announcement they made this past week, we now have Apple subscriptions. So subscribe is back, but now subscribe means you're paying for an exclusive podcast in Apple Podcasts. Confused yet? Well, let's try to sort all of this out. So here's a good visualization of all three types of podcasts on Apple now. The first is free. These are regular RSS feeds that have been submitted to Apple Podcasts. You publish these on a podcast hosting platform like Transistor.
Record and mix your audio, then upload it to Transistor as a new episode. Once you've published your first episode, you can submit your feed to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more with the click of a button.
They generate the RSS feed there. You submit it to Apple Podcasts. That's a free show. That's what's always existed on Apple Podcasts. That has not changed. Let me repeat, that has not changed. So that is still the main way that most podcasters will get their show on Apple. That is what Apple is still recommending. Nothing has changed there. You still need to get your own podcast hosting for that. You'll still need to upload your MP3s. And the nice thing is your podcast hosting platform allows you to distribute to all of the platforms in one place, and will also give you overall analytics for each of these platforms, so you can see how your show is performing on Apple Podcasts and Overcast and Pocket Cast and any place a person is listening. Okay, but what's changed is Apple's added 2 new types of shows. So you can also have a freemium show, which is your regular RSS feed that you've already submitted. Apple's going to bring those in the same way they always have. You'll publish on your podcast hosting platform. They'll go into Apple. But then you can also upload on Apple bonus content, paid bonus content that is only available for subscribers. And so that could mean every regular episode you have in your RSS feed, it can have an equivalent that is ad-free, for example, and is the paid version of the show. So that's freemium. And then you can also have a completely paid subscription. So, Luminary is a good example of this. you can have a show that you need to pay a monthly subscription in order to access, and that's paid. So most of the confusion is coming from there, but a lot of the confusion is coming from Podcast Connect. Podcast Connect is where podcasters have always gone to submit and manage their podcast on Apple Podcasts. And it's just gone through update. There's still some bugs. It takes a little while to get it going. Sometimes you have to wait 8 to 24 hours to log in. But this screen here is part of the problem. It's part of the reason it's so confusing now, because there's add existing show with an RSS feed and add a new show. And I don't know why they made this decision. I think it needs to be fixed. Because if you have created a brand new podcast on a regular RSS feed on a podcast hosting platform, you would go to your hosting platform, you would grab the RSS feed, you would go to Podcast Connect, and you actually need to click Add Existing RSS Feed. Even if it's a new show that you're submitting, you need to choose Add Existing RSS Feed, and you'll paste in your RSS feed URL, and then you'll click Add. That's how you submit an RSS feed to Apple Podcasts now. As I've demonstrated before, this is significantly more difficult than submitting an RSS feed to Spotify or Google Podcasts or many other platforms. But the confusion is coming from this Add a Show screen, because now it says Add a New Show, and now you can give it a name, New Pod, click Add, and the idea is that this is where you're going to create your premium podcast, your paid podcast. You're going to be able to add your show art here. You're going to be able to upload bonus content here, like for paying subscribers, or if it's a completely paid show, you're going to be able to upload all your premium content here. That's what this is for. And unless you're planning on offering paid bonus content or a completely separate paid subscription podcast just for people on Apple Podcasts, mind you, it's not available anywhere else, my understanding is this is where you'll go. Now, this doesn't launch until May, and so they've got time to maybe finesse this a little bit. This is how I would change that screen. If anyone at Apple's watching, let's just go here. This is how I would change it. Let's open up my design mode here. So you click Add a Show. First, let us know if you're adding, I would just say not an existing show, a show with an RSS feed. That's it right there, right? You could even make a free show with an RSS feed, or a public show with an RSS feed. So that's one recommendation. And then the second part, or if you're adding a brand new show without an RSS feed, why don't we just call, if you're adding a brand new premium subscription show. You don't have to say without an RSS feed. Premium content, Apple subscribers only show, paid content show. You've got to figure out the nomenclature here, Apple, because a regular public show with an RSS feed is what most people are going to be adding. That's still the default. And so with these radio buttons, make it clear. Add a regular free show or a regular public show with an RSS feed, or submit an RSS feed. And then make your second option something like create a new premium subscription show. There has to be a way of delineating these two. A regular public show, which is based on an RSS feed, hosted elsewhere off of Apple, and a premium subscription show. And if I've misunderstood how these work, please let me know in the comments. But that's my understanding of how these work. And if we look at Apple's documentation, I think there's opportunity for more clarity here. But in terms of submitting a show, you can submit a show to Apple via an RSS feed that's hosted by a third-party hosting provider, or you can participate in the Apple Podcasters program. And the Apple Podcasters program is about selling subscriptions. This needs to be made explicit. I don't know why they're being so vague, but it's either you're submitting an RSS feed or you're creating not just a show, but a premium content. You're creating premium content or paid content in Apple Podcast Connect. Those are the options. It's confusing, isn't it? I'm hoping that Apple's able to clarify things as they go along. This is all brand new, but hopefully this explanation, free is a regular RSS feed, the same way you've always done it. Freemium is an RSS feed plus bonus content you upload to Apple, and paid is premium content, a whole entire show that lives on Apple. Now, one more thing. It is still also possible to have a paid private podcast that is hosted somewhere like Transistor. And there's shows like Sam Harris has a paid private podcast that you can subscribe to. John Gruber and Ben Thompson have a paid private podcast you can subscribe to. This is also still allowed. And the benefit, of course, is if you have a paid private podcast, is your subscribers are going to be able to listen however they get their podcast currently, as long as, with the exception of Spotify. But, on my paid private podcast here, 42% of my listeners are on Overcast. 28% listen on Apple Podcasts, 11% on Pocket Casts, 6% on iTunes, and 4% get these email notifications and then listen in a web browser. So this is still possible. And honestly, this is really user-friendly. People pay, they get taken to this page here. They'll receive new episodes by email. So you own your relationship with the customer. Apple, their premium subscriptions will not give you their email address. You have no direct connection to your customer. But using Transistor, you do. We'll even notify them by email when they get a new episode. They can listen to the newest episode right in the browser. They can even track their progress through all your paid episodes in the web browser. Or they can get their phone, scan that QR code, open up this same landing page on their phone, and one click, add it to Apple Podcasts. It's actually really user-friendly now, and it's platform agnostic. People can use the podcast listening app they already listen to podcasts in. I hope that's been helpful. I hope I've been able to demystify some of this. If you have comments or questions, leave them down below, or you can go to transistor.fm. We have a live chat widget here. We'd be happy to answer your questions, and we'd be happy to become your podcast hosting platform for both public podcasts that you can still submit to Apple, or private podcasts. All right, I'll talk to you soon.